What the f- Hi, and welcome back to Orbiting the Shelf, where today I am talking about When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. As always, if you know me, if you're a returning subscriber or viewer to the channel, you're probably aware that I have a knack for horror. My mainstays are sci-fi and horror and fantasy, specifically sci-fi and horror, and bonus points if a book is both of those things. One of my favorite books of all time is Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. I am an absolute massive fan of horror, fantasy horror, sci-fi horror, literary horror. You name it, I've probably read it. It's probably in my library somewhere, and most of the time I have a pretty good opinion of it. Jumping right into the spoiler-free review, you don't want any information. You want to go into this book blind. You want to experience it for yourself. You don't even want to read the back of the cover. You just want to jump right into the deep end, and you're only coming to this review to know if it's worth your money, if it's worth your shelf space, if it's worth your time, if it's worth the Audible credit, so on and so forth. Is this book worth it? Well, let me explain. I rate books on a 1 through 10 scale. I call it my subjective rating because it is very subjective. 1 is the worst book I've ever read. It probably ruined my week, my month, possibly even my life. It is a detriment to the genre for the worse. I have very strong feelings on this book, and I probably low-key have some beef with it. 5 is average. Don't be too hard on 5s. 5 is where like 80% of any entertainment content lies ever. 5 is the movie you go see for a $5 matinee on a Tuesday night, and you think to yourself, you know what? That was pretty good. That was okay. I don't regret seeing this movie. I don't regret reading this book. Could have been better. I didn't care for it. I didn't hate it. It was entertaining, and that was it. That is 5. 5 is the most lukewarm, average product you could ever produce. Don't be too hard on 5s. 10, on the opposite end of the spectrum, is the best thing I've ever read in my life. It is one of the best pieces of media I've ever consumed. It redefines the genre. It sets the bar for what I expect from these books going forward. I come back and I think about it on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, whatever. It changed my life for the better. It made me rethink the way I live my life. You get the point. 10 is amazing. It's perfection. It's probably as good as anything gets, and it's nearly unobtainable. Most of my favorite books land in the 9 to a 9.5 zone because 10 is so perfect, it's asking a lot. 1 is obviously on the other end of that spectrum. Now, when I made this scale, when I started this YouTube channel because I wanted to get into book narration and I wanted to just put my work out there. I wanted to share my voice and my talents and my auditions, and I just wanted to have a platform to voice that. I thought to myself, well, I can do read-ins and then I can review a book. That way people have a reason to hear my work. That's why I started this channel. And when I invented this rating system, I wanted to make something that was understandable, that was fair, that served a purpose other than just superficial, nonsensical ratings. I hate how every book you look at on Goodreads or Google has like an average of 3.5 to 4 stars. It's kind of meaningless. It's kind of hard to gauge what a book is from that rating, and that's why I came up with the subjective rating scale. So I could assign meaning to the numbers, so you knew exactly what you're getting into, and rather than the confines of 1 through 5 not feeling like enough, we had 1 through 10. That way I could assign a very specific value and emotion and worth, subjectively at least, to every book I read. When I was trying to think of the kind of book that would be a 1, I laughed to myself. Because surely no book could ever be a 1. No book could ever ruin my week. No book could ever ruin my month. No book could ever be so bad that it was actually a detriment to the genre. I thought this was a funny, superficial rating for the sake of scaling that would never see the light of day. I never thought 1 would be used. When I first started this channel, I got scared to give out 5s. I had a very hard time being harsh. I had a very hard time being honest with my negative feelings towards books because I hate the concept of burning bridges. I hate the concept of hurting the feelings of creators who put these vulnerable pieces of work into the world to be judged. I think it's unfair to judge someone's art harshly when you have contributed nothing to the space to be judged back. So, with that in mind, I've always been very polite. And I'll kindly say, probably not worth your money, but it's average. That was the harshest I would ever be. I have finally found a piece of work that has utterly destroyed my will to hold back and to be kind and to not judge so harshly. With that being said, what would I rate this book on a scale of 1 through 10? If it isn't obvious by now, I would give this a 1. Now, let me explain. I think a lot of my grievances with this book are heavily genre specific. I think I have stepped far too much into the realm of a genre I'm unfamiliar with. I consider myself a connoisseur of horror. In fact, I have a literary horror book I've been writing for the last couple of months that I am looking to send to agents to market soon. I am very deeply entrenched in the genre movies, video games, books. I can't get enough of it. I thought I had seen pretty much everything horror had to offer. I didn't know that there was a side of the genre so extreme that I found it disgusting. So, if you're the kind of person who just consumes this type of horror as a means to an end because you have an itch and only this type of thing can scratch it for you, if you just need a weird, overly indulgent fix of gore and you're that kind of person, this book is for you. Maybe it's a 10 for you. Obviously, this is a subjective, heavily subjective review, as always. I don't think this is a genre made for me, even as a horror fanatic. I don't think this is a genre made for normal people. I think this is a genre made for people with serious issues. And if I could ever come close to giving an objective review, a matter of fact review that encapsulates the book itself as a whole, if I could ever say something was objectively trash, it would be this book. Now, that's not to say that they're books that aren't literal crimes against humanity that have literally gotten authors sent to jail for how disgusting they were, but I will never review something that bad. I will never read something that bad, and I probably wouldn't have read this one if April wasn't an absolute release desert. There's very few books coming out in April, and even fewer that reside in my realm of horror, science fiction, fantasy. Do I think this is worth your time if you are a normal, sane human being without issues? No. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the things I don't like. And it may be a little spoilery, but this is objectively so not worth anyone's time that I really don't think hearing the spoilers will matter to you unless this is your genre, in which case, go with God, Godspeed. I bless you on your journey. Go read your book. I'm judging you, and so is God. Anyways, if that's all you need to know, go with peace, read your book, have fun, or don't read it. Just don't take my hesitancy and my disgust as an advertisement for this piece of work. Let me dive into that. If you know anything about me, I grew up with a relatively harsh life. I can relate to some of the themes of this book, growing up with a single mom who was extremely poor, half native, half Mexican. I grew up in really bad neighborhoods. I've been shot at. I went to a school where I got in trouble with drug dealers. I then escaped poverty by going to the army as an infantryman during the global war on terror, and I saw some pretty horrific things. I've seen people expire, to put it in a way that won't demonetize me, in pretty horrific ways. I then left the military, went to college, and worked in the realm of probation as a sort of counselor. I don't want to give away too much about my personal life, and I served my community in that position for quite a while I was in school. I worked with the worst of the worst criminals. Murder, domestic violence, and crimes that are so horrific I can't really even talk about them without getting in trouble with YouTube. I'm sure you know the type of criminals and crimes I'm talking about. And I'm not tooting my own horn when I say this. I'm a very sturdy man with very sturdy resolve. Nothing really shakes me anymore. I have seen the absolute worst humanity has to offer. I have seen horrible, horrible things happen in real life in the army and my other jobs. And I come from a Native American family who has experienced, in their lifetimes, genocide, cultural erasure, and horrible crimes against humanity. I can't express to you enough that this book did not rattle my delicate sensibilities. This book is an affront to human decency. Now, not so much as like other notorious authors who have been like legally charged for the material they put forth. I don't consider that literature. I don't consider that a book. At bare minimum, this piece of work from Nat Cassidy is still a book at the end of the day. And that's the only reason I will dignify this book with a review. So, diving right into it, I got into this book because April is an absolute slump for new releases. And when I saw that there was a horror release that had went under my radar and I didn't have to dig into my backlog, I was super excited. I went ahead and I pre-ordered the audiobook and I pre-ordered the real book, and the moment it came out, I dove right into it. I listened to the audiobook portion during my morning routine. I listened to it at the gym. I listened to it on my drive back and forth from school. I listened to it in the shower. I read the book in class. I read the book while I was going to bed. I read the book after I woke up, and I absolutely slammed this book down in the course of like 13 hours maybe. And with that being said, I'll stick to the format. Audiobook. Is the audiobook worth it? If you insist on consuming this piece of literature, and you have a preference towards audiobooks like I do, sure. It's produced well. The voice actress does a fantastic job. Can't praise them enough. High quality, produced well, cast well. The audiobook itself probably falls in the A- to B+ territory quality wise. The actress does a good job objectively at portraying everything here. The actress, whoever she may be, don't want to include her name in this video because it's heavily negative, very talented, very solid, great producing skills, great acting skills, high quality audiobook from a production side of things. How is the book version of this book? It's consumable. It's there. You can read it. I don't have a preference in this one. I'm at such a loss for words in this video, but diving right into the things I didn't like. Number 1, the author starts off with a foreword about trigger warnings, and he's essentially just mocking people who don't like trigger warnings. Fair enough. As someone who writes horror books, is in the social work field, clinical social work field, as someone with degrees in this sort of realm and space of trauma and therapy, as someone who is a relatively liberal person, I agree with trigger warnings. As someone who suffers from PTSD from the army, I can't be more thankful than when an author puts forth a trigger warning so I know how to steel myself properly. Now, the trigger warning isn't what bothers me. The author has a foreword mocking people who dislike the trigger warnings, and he does so in a way that is like very edgy and kind of alienating to the audience and sets the book off on the wrong tone, even if you agree with him, which I do. And I'm kind of surprised that an editor or a publisher or an agent kind of let that much like personal memery into a book. It felt unprofessional, it felt icky, but whatever. I have been engrossed in the horror genre long enough to know that most of the people who create within the genre are a little bit strange, myself included. We tend to be an eccentric folk, so I let that slide. First real complaint would be the pacing. Typically, a horror book is built very similarly to romance. In the same way that music, from a composition standpoint, metal is very similar to classical. Let me break this down further. In a normal contemporary romance book, you are teased into an eventual climax. Phrasing. It starts off with a confrontation. The characters meet. There's flirting. There's talking. There's dating. There's kissing. there's infatuation, there's yearning, there is a sense of intensity that is built up over time, and you are essentially held in this state until the climax where it all pays off. Horror is built the exact same way, because to take advantage of human fear properly, you have to craft a story in that exact same progression. You have to introduce the character. For the purposes of instilling dread in your reader, you have to introduce them and endear them to this character. You have to give them a reason to care. Now, once your audience is invested in your character, you can introduce the problem. Then you can introduce the fear. You can introduce the issue, and then it builds up slowly until the eventual reveal of the monster and the big firework explosion that ends your book and lets you descend into the ending. I think horror authors and contemporary romance authors probably have way more in common than they would like to think. It's like two sides of the same coin, exact same plot structure, just different flavor. Now, imagine a contemporary romance book, or any romance book for that matter, romantasy, whatever, and instead of having that satisfying build up to a climax, the author was like, here's the character. And you went, oh, cool, let's get to know this character. And the author went, no, before you get to know this character, immediate, raunchy, dirty sex scene. It's graphic, it's unnecessary, and it's overly indulgent. And you go, oh, that's kind of strange and overwhelming, but okay, I trust you to keep this book coherent. So you continue reading, and the author goes, okay, guess what happens after that overly indulgent romance scene? An even more overly indulgent romance scene. And this time, it's way worse. And it's handled with no tact. And you go, huh, that's really strange. And then the book is just an ever climaxing, unrelenting series of overly indulgent and borderline disrespectful to your intelligence scenes, one after the other, each one just getting grimier and worse. And one of the things that you have to do as an author when writing within this genre, horror, literary horror, what have you, and you're dealing with sensitive subjects, addiction, children, spousal abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse, God forbid. None of that falls in my purview, really, the last two at least. You have to do so with tact, with respect. You have to do so delicately, and you have to balance this very tight rope of exploitation and representation. Now, it's always important that if you're going to fall and teeter to one side or the other, you don't land in exploitation. If anything, you want to land in maybe some like overly done representation area where you're bringing light to the subject and handling it respectfully. If you can't manage to walk that tightrope well, always fall into this area. This book starts in this area. It starts in the realm of exploitation and never once even really tries to be representation. Respectful representation at that. One of the things that bothered me most about this book was a child character who is, for all intents and purposes, the main character. I mean, there's a main character, and then there's the character driving the story forward, which is the child. And when I talk about exploitation in this book, I mean, one, my biggest issue, the child is there as a contrast to all of the gore, all of the shameless debauchery. Have you ever heard the phrase that making the audience laugh makes the pain hit harder later? That's what the author tries to do here, but instead, the contrast of childhood innocence is supposed to make the gore and the horror hit harder. So the author will go, oh, and the child is like 3 or 4 years old. It's made very clear he's under 5 years old. The author will be like, he uses the word daddy a lot in like a gross childhood innocence kind of way. So the kid in this book will be like, oh, daddy's coming. And then someone will get like eaten by a werewolf in a scene that feels like fetishized vor instead of horror or gore. And then the kid will be like, woof, And then the girl, the main character, will be like, oh, he said woof instead of wolf. Doesn't that make him such a cute, innocent kid? And then someone gets hacked to pieces in this absolutely derivative, terrible way. That's just overly described and overindulgent. And this child only ever serves as a contrast to all the horror. And that's fine. Think about Newt in Aliens, but this child character is just being exploited in like the most diabolical way possible. And that leads me into my second point about exploitation. I hate it when I read a horror book and the majority, I should say, people who get hurt, the people who are driving the story, the people who serve as pawns for gore scenes are women. This is a very strange phenomenon that happens with a lot of like the overindulgent gore horror authors. It's always women getting torn to pieces. It's always women getting hurt. And it's done so in a borderline fetishized way. And that just further serves my icky feeling of exploitation in this book. And trust me, I know what fans of Nat Cassidy and this genre in general are going to say. You're going to look at me and you're going to say, well, it's not exploitation, it's literary horror because it's about childhood trauma. It's about abusive fathers. It's not shameless exploitation. It's story driven. It's trauma driven. And to that, I would say, that argument is incredibly disingenuous. It's like saying that the pizza boy in all of those old Pamela Anderson videos served as representation for this food service community and was a metaphor for the working class of America. Really? I mean, that's what you're gonna go with? No. I would counter that and say not only is it disingenuous, it's not metaphor or catharsis. It's horror for people who need a legal excuse to consume something so perverse. The story, the metaphor, all feels like a shameless facade for people who just want to consume debauchery, just absolute perversions of literature. And that kind of brings me to another thing I didn't like: the story overall. Not only is this just a shameless mask to put horrible things on paper to serve some sick purpose, the story itself is just bad. It's so clearly just a sham to write horrible things. So, spoilers here, which I don't care too much about. Hopefully, none of you watching this ever read this book. I'm sure some of you will for the sake of memes or because I've accidentally put you onto something else you can consume mindlessly. But it starts with this kid who's abused by his dad. His dad was an Afghanistan veteran who had signed up for some program where he was tested on, and then it went wrong and he had a kid, and for some reason the kid inherited these supernatural abilities that cause him to conjure things from his mind that he believes in out of fear or happiness or admiration or whatever. It's so lazy. It's so second grade creative writing class level of nonsense. And then it's an excuse for the author to just interject horror and gore at every possible turn. Oh, the kid made his dad a monster. Gore scene. Oh, the kid's afraid of drawings on the wall. Gore scene against women. Every time it's a woman for some reason. Oh, the kid's afraid of Halloween masks. A little girl gets munched on this time. It's vile in the most inexcusable way possible. Don't be fooled by the people who need an excuse to consume this. This isn't a book highlighting trauma. This isn't a book doing justice to parental abuse against children. This is just a lazy excuse to legally put pen to paper to fulfill whatever sick needs these people have. And pretty much everything you learn about the story throughout this book is just shameless exposition in the form of this child. If the story ever needs to progress, the kid will just be like, oh, I remember this time Daddy did this thing, and that's gonna explain where we end up in 5 pages. It's like the author heard the phrase, show, don't tell. So he doesn't tell you, he shows you a picture like you're supposed to, but the picture is just writing on a chalkboard. Like the showing he's doing is just a whiteboard with exposition written on it lazily. And speaking on technical flaws, if you're wondering about the prose, the metaphor, the poetry, there is none. There's none. If you've ever heard the Stephen King saying that the mark of an amateur writer is the abuse of adverbs, that's this. The only time creativity is introduced into this book is when the author has an excuse to do something horrifically violent. Ugh, it's so shameless. Furthering my points on the technical things I didn't like instead of just shamelessly bashing how bad it was in other ways, I'm sure you've heard a lot about writing good dialogue. And if you haven't, let me explain very briefly. Writing good dialogue hinges on being able to write the way people talk. If you write dialogue in a way that is entirely just serving a purpose, an audience will never believe it, they'll never attach themselves to it, and they'll never enjoy reading it. And whether they know it or not, it's because they're reading dialogue that serves as a story-moving device. And it's not dialogue that represents the way people talk to people. So, one of the greatest skills you can craft as an author is making believable dialogue, making characters who interact colloquially in the same way people do. They say like, they use slang, they have believable human conversations. Now, once again, it's like this author took a creative writing class or an intro to writing or writing 101 and heard this very basic instruction. And he thought to himself, you know what will make my dialogue believable? If everyone talked like a cringy middle school band kid who was obsessed with memes and swear words. And so every time people interact or people have inner monologues, it's just like cringe. All the character interactions in this book are just two Hot Topic t-shirts from 2013 talking to one another. If it's not exploitative, if it's not mind-numbingly dumb, it's cringe. At its absolute best, this book is cringe. The best you can hope for in any given moment is just cringe. I was finishing this book and I was like, man, I'd rather listen to more cringe dialogue. And the cringe doesn't stop there. It goes into the characters. There's like this overly self-indulgent 2 pages dedicated to the main character's mom and how she's like 60 years old in an assisted living facility, but she looks like she's 21 and she looks super hot, and she's just like this overly intelligent, overly sarcastic mean girl who like destroys the feelings of everybody she meets. And it's so, and I keep saying this, but it's the main theme of this book, overly indulgent. And at one point, the US government is introduced into this book for the sake of having somewhere for this story to go, because the monster is such an overpowered, nonsensical thing. And so the FBI gets into it, and when he introduces the FBI, it sort of comes out of left field, and it reminded me of that scene in Monsters vs. Aliens where the president of the United States starts playing the Crazy Frog song on the keyboard. Probably the best moment in this book. Just some weird FBI dude eating candy and talking about dye made from beetle shells. And the worst part is there's no build up to any of it. The whole book just happens. Have you ever seen the old cartoons where like something snowballs out of control? The Roadrunner will push a snowball down a hill and it gets bigger and bigger. This book is like if the Roadrunner pushed a snowball down a hill and it started as a massive house-sized boulder and just stayed a massive house-sized boulder. And then the book ended. The pacing is bad. This is the most informal review I've ever done. But the last thing I'm going to say about this book, when I worked in the realm of probation. Once again, not getting too specific, so I don't want to give away too much about my personal life. I was in charge of high risk people. So, like I said before, murderers, child, crime people, if that gives you a hint. I could usually go a couple months without needing a mental health day. I understood what my job was, and I did it pretty well. But after talking to people with those types of crimes, I would go home at the end of the day feeling like there was some sort of metaphysical grime stuck to my skin. And I felt like I carried some of their like nasty aura home with me. Like their sins were so bad, I couldn't wash them off at the end of the day, even though I had nothing to do with them. This book at the end reminded me of that so strongly. When I finished this book, I felt like I had to go home and take the coldest shower possible, scrub my top layer of skin off, and then eat a salad with no dressing. After reading this book, I feel like I should be doing a pilgrimage somewhere and fasting and limiting myself to like 12 ounces of lukewarm water. I feel like I need to do something to scrub this book from my soul. And once again, this is coming from me, a pretty hardened man who's had to steel himself through a lot of bad things, author of literary horror books. It's coming from me, someone who has consumed horror since he was a child. And don't come at me with like, well, maybe gore horror isn't your thing, because I've always loved zombie movies. I loved the most recent Evil Dead movie. I've never had a problem with gore horror in my life. This book feels like a crime, and I feel like if you genuinely enjoy this type of literature, maybe someone should check your hard drives. I've never read this author's work before, but when I Googled him and I looked at his previous works and looked at the covers, I went, yeah, that tracks. That looks about right. Wow. I think it's like shamelessly undefendable, but I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. You get the picture. Things I liked. Sometimes the author did a good job at like putting a finger on complex emotions in a way that was understandable to people who aren't in the clinical social work field like myself. Maybe I could praise the bravery it took to put this kind of work into the world and be judged by it, and have your picture out there with a name attached to it so people know who you are. Brave. I mean, if you're going to publish such shameless acts, at least don't do it anonymously. Genuine praise right there. At least you're not a coward about putting this work out into the world. But as always, this is a safe space to discuss things. If I'm wrong, tell me why I'm wrong, but I am way less inclined to listen to you this time around. I'll discuss it with you. I'll be friendly. If you're the author, sorry I just tore your book to shreds. I'm sure you're a good dude. I'm sure you're a fine person. I'm sure you had good intentions. But wow. Wow. I'm sorry April has been such a drought and I haven't put out a lot of reviews. Slammed. It's the end of its finals. I'm wrapping up grad school right now. April's a book drought. I'm this close to finishing my book. So, April's been a slow month. I'm excited for the end of the month. There's some other horror books coming out that I'm excited to read. I might be doing a backlog video this week, so look for that. If my subjective one is super wrong, let me know. Tell me what your rating was. Tell me what you thought of the book. If you agree with me, great. If you don't, great. Comment below, let me know. And as always, please, if you do not mind, liking and subscribing. It is super hard growing this channel from zero in this very niche community, but I appreciate every single one of you. I love talking to you. I love having a place to put my thoughts into the world. This is my first negative one ever, but that's going to be all for me, man. That's going to be all from me. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.